Commander Voss grabbed her arm in front of 40 soldiers and yanked the qualification badge off her chest. The metal pin tore through the fabric. She didn't flinch, didn't step back, just looked at him with eyes that had seen things he would never understand. "Prove you deserve that uniform," he said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing anyone on that base had ever heard. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Because she stood perfectly still, perfectly calm. Told every person watching that the man who just issued that challenge had no idea what he had just started. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Her name on the base roster read, Lieutenant Maya Reeves, and beside it in the assignment column someone had typed the word temporary in parentheses. That single word followed her everywhere. It was in the way the administrative clerk handed her the base access card without making eye contact. It was in the way the housing officer pointed her toward a bunk in the overflow barracks, the ones reserved for soldiers passing through on short rotations, the ones where nobody bothered to learn your name. It was in the way the breakfast line parted around her that first morning, not out of respect, but out of the low-grade social physics that governs military installations. The unspoken rule that says, a face nobody recognizes is a face that doesn't matter yet. Maya picked up her tray and found an empty table in the corner. She set her coffee down. She opened a small notebook. She began writing. The man sitting 3 tables away, Chief Petty Officer Garrett Doyle, watched her for exactly 12 seconds before he leaned across to Master Sergeant Hicks and said, "Who cleared her for the operations side of the facility? She's got a soft assignment badge. That's admin clearance." Hicks glanced over. "Reeves. She's on the temporary list." "Temporary for what?" "Evaluation support, I think. Something about the new qualification protocol review." Doyle made a sound in the back of his throat that wasn't quite a word. "So she's a paper pusher." "Looks like." Maya didn't look up from her notebook. She had heard every word. The acoustics in military dining halls were something most soldiers never learned to account for. Sound traveled in unexpected angles, bounced off hard surfaces, carried detail across distances that felt safe but weren't. She had learned that lesson in a different country, under a different name at a time when mishearing a conversation could mean something far worse than social embarrassment. She kept writing. The notebook was filled with environmental observations. Wind speed estimates based on the movement of dust across the motor pool. Temperature differential readings she calculated by watching the shimmer pattern above the vehicle hoods. The angle of shadow. Fall from the eastern antenna tower, which told her it was 8:14 in the morning, give or take 40 seconds without looking at a clock. She closed the notebook when she finished her coffee. Then she picked up her tray, returned it to the collection station, and walked toward the operations building without looking at anyone. She had work to do. The qualification protocol review that had placed Maya on this base was on its surface exactly what the paperwork claimed it to be. A procedural evaluation of the SEAL selection and advanced marksmanship assessment pipeline, ordered by a joint committee that had grown increasingly concerned about the inconsistency between training scores and real-world performance outcomes. The review team was 3 people: Maya, a data analyst named Torres, who worked remotely and communicated exclusively by encrypted message, and a retired warrant officer named Breck, who showed up on base twice a week and smelled permanently of pipe tobacco. Nobody on the base knew who had authorized the review. Nobody knew that the authorization had come from a level of the command structure that most officers on this installation had never personally communicated with. Nobody knew that Maya Reeves was not in any meaningful sense a paper pusher. She was the review. Everything else was window dressing. Commander Alan Voss ran Joint Special Operations Qualification Station Echo with the confidence of a man who had never once doubted that he was exactly where the military wanted him to be. He was 51 years old. He had spent 22 years inside the Special Operations community, first as an operator, then as a training officer, and finally as the station commander, whose name had become synonymous with a particular standard of selection rigor. Men who passed through Echo went on to extraordinary careers. Men who failed at Echo often never fully recovered from it. Voss believed this was the point. He believed that extreme pressure revealed character, that the men who broke under his standards were men who would have broken in the field, and that any discomfort he created in the training environment was therefore a gift. A painful gift, yes, but a gift. This belief had served him well. It had also allowed certain other things to flourish alongside it. Maya had been on the base 4 days when she first saw Commander Voss in person. He walked into the operations building at 0900 with 3 of his senior training officers behind him, moving the way. Senior commanders often move not quickly, but with a weight of assumption, as though the air around him had already been informed of his arrival and arranged itself accordingly. He stopped when he saw Maya at the secondary workstation. "Who is this?" he said. He didn't say it to her, he said it to the room. Senior Training Officer Carver, standing nearest to him, checked the clipboard he always carried. "Lieutenant Reeves, sir. She's on the protocol review team. She's been cleared for. I can read a clearance level, Carver." Voss looked at Maya directly for the first time. "What exactly are you reviewing?" Maya looked up from her screen. "Assessment consistency metrics across the last 4 selection cycles, sir. Specifically the correlation between Phase 2 marksmanship qualification scores and post-assignment performance data." A brief silence. "That's internal data," Voss said. "Yes, sir. I have authorization to access it." Another silence, slightly longer. "From who?" Maya held his gaze without any apparent effort. "The authorization is documented in the review charter, sir. I can pull it up if you'd like." Voss looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at Carver. Then he looked back at Maya. "Where are you stationed when you're not reviewing things?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss that, sir." The temperature in the room dropped about 3 degrees without anyone touching the climate controls. Carver found something very interesting to examine on his clipboard. Voss made a decision in that, the kind of decision that experienced commanders make when they encounter something they don't fully understand and choose to minimize it rather than investigate it. He decided that Maya Reeves was a bureaucratic inconvenience, a committee-sent observer with more clearance paperwork than actual relevance, someone to be managed, not taken seriously. "Carry on," he said, and walked past her toward the main briefing room. Maya turned back to her screen. She had noted 3 things in those 90 seconds that she would write in her observation log that evening. She didn't think about them now. She simply kept working. On the 3rd day of the 2nd week, she watched the qualification training run. The morning exercise involved 12 candidates in the final phase of the marksmanship progression, and it was, from a structural standpoint, genuinely impressive. Voss ran a tight program. The range officers were professional. The safety protocols were current. The equipment was properly maintained. On paper, and in most visible respects, Echo qualification training functioned exactly as it was supposed to function. What Maya was watching for was not visible. She stood at the observation point above the range, not taking notes. Just watching. Just absorbing the pattern of how instructions were given, how corrections were delivered, how the training officers moved between candidates, which candidates received more direct attention, which ones were subtly nudged toward a particular outcome by the specific language used around them. She had been watching patterns like this for a long time, long enough to know that the most consequential things in any institution are rarely the things that appear in official documentation. She was still watching when Sergeant First Class Danny Kowalski missed his 3rd consecutive shot on the long-range sequence. The range went quiet in the way. Ranges go quiet when something has gone wrong, but nobody is sure yet how wrong it is. Maya watched the training officer nearest to Kowalski, a compact, precise man named Hansen, take 2 steps toward the candidate. She watched the brief exchange she couldn't hear from this distance. She watched Kowalski reset. She watched him miss again. Then she watched Hansen write something on his scoring sheet and move on. That was the moment she became entirely certain about what this review was going to find. Because Kowalski's position was wrong. His grip angle was wrong. His breathing control was wrong in a very specific way that had nothing to do with nerves or talent. It had to do with the way he had been taught. Someone had built a systematic error into his technique at an early stage of training, and nobody had corrected it, and now he was being graded on the results of that error, as though the error were his own failure. She walked down from the observation point. She walked to the edge of the range. She had no official reason to be there. Her access badge covered the observation deck, not the active range floor. She was aware of this. She walked past the boundary marker anyway. Hansen noticed her immediately. "Lieutenant, the active range is restricted to—" "What's he doing wrong?" Maya said. Hansen blinked. "Excuse me. Kowalski, what's his identified correction note?" Hansen looked at her with the particular expression that male instructors sometimes deploy when a female officer asks a direct technical question, not quite contempt, but something adjacent to it. Something that says the question itself is presumptuous. "The candidate has a consistency issue under extended session fatigue," Hansen said carefully. "It's documented. His grip is breaking at the second pad on his trigger finger," Maya said. "Not from fatigue, from initial instruction. Someone taught him to place his finger too far forward, probably in phase 1. The muscle memory is now hardwired. Correcting it at this stage requires a specific remediation protocol. The standard correction methodology won't work." Hansen stared at her. "How long have you been a marksmanship instructor, Lieutenant?" I'm not an instructor," Maya said. "I'm a reviewer." "Then with respect." "Write it down," she said. "Kowalski grip remediation phase 1 regression error. If he fails qualification this cycle, I want that note in the file." She paused. "If it's not in the file, I'll want to know why." She turned and walked back toward the boundary marker. Behind her, she heard Hansen say nothing for a very long time. That evening, the observation log she sent to Torres was significantly longer than the previous ones. The call came at 06:30 the following morning. Not a formal summons. A message through the base communication system that said Commander Voss had requested her presence in his office at 0700 for a routine check-in. The language was polite. The framing was casual. The underlying message was something else entirely. Maya arrived at 0700. She sat in the chair across from his desk and waited while he finished reading something on his screen, a small power positioning habit she had observed in senior officers so many times it had stopped registering as anything except behavioral data. "Lieutenant Reeves," Voss said without looking up. "Sir?" Now he looked up. "I'm going to be direct with you." "I appreciate that, sir. This review process, whatever it is creating friction in my training pipeline. I had a range officer come to me yesterday asking whether your access level extended to active range operations. I had to tell him I wasn't certain. That's not an acceptable position for a station commander to be in on his own installation." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" It wasn't quite a question. "Yes, sir. I should have been clearer about the scope of my observation access when I arrived. I'll make sure that doesn't create confusion going forward." Voss leaned back. He studied her with the practiced, evaluative gaze of a man who had spent decades sizing people up. "Where did you say you were stationed?" "I didn't say, sir." "Right." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you actually been in?" 11 years. 11 years. He said it the way people say things when they're calculating whether the number adds up. "And in 11 years, what's your background? What are you personnel analysis?" Maya held his gaze. "I'm a reviewer, sir." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger yet. Something closer to the decision that precedes anger. The decision that a person with authority makes when they realize that a person with less authority is not going to give them what they're asking for. "I'm going to request an expanded brief from your originating command," Voss said. "That's your prerogative, sir. And in the meantime, I'd like you to limit your direct interactions with my training staff to formal documented channels." Maya considered that for a moment. "Sir," she said carefully, "I want to make sure I understand. Are you restricting my access to active range observation?" "I'm asking you to operate within clearly established parameters." "Which parameters specifically the review charter authorizes?" "I know what the review charter says," Voss said, and his voice had found a sharper edge. "I'm telling you what I'm asking, as the station commander." The room held that statement for a moment. Maya looked at him with the same unhurried steadiness she brought to everything. "I'll document this conversation and note your request in my operational log, sir. Is there anything else?" His jaw tightened. "No." She straightened her uniform and walked to the door. "Lieutenant." She stopped, turned. Voss was looking at her with something she hadn't seen in his face before. Not contempt. Not suspicion. Something harder to name. The look of a man who has just realized in some pre-verbal way that the conversation he thought he was controlling may not have been the one actually happening. "Where did you train?" he asked. And for the first time since she'd arrived on this base, Maya let something cross her face that wasn't the measured neutrality she had been wearing like a second uniform. It was brief, almost invisible. "Nowhere you'd be familiar with, sir," she said. And she walked out. The event that changed everything happened the following morning, and it happened in front of 42 people. The selection candidates were assembled for a formal review formation, a standard accountability muster that Voss ran every 2 weeks to assess bearing uniform standards and what he called the visible demonstration of the military identity. It was partly legitimate and partly ceremonial, the kind of ritual that served important functions in terms of unit cohesion, and had also over time become something else in the specific way things can become something else when a senior leader uses them as a stage. Maya had been told about the formation by Torres, who had flagged it as a relevant observation point. She arrived and stood near the perimeter, notebook in hand, the same way she always stood, observing. Voss moved through the formation with Senior Training Officer Carver beside him, stopping to inspect individual candidates. He spoke to several of them. Some corrections were technical. Some were motivational. Some were delivered in a tone that made the air feel smaller. He had almost completed the front row when he stopped. He turned. He looked directly at Maya, and something that had been building in him across 2 weeks of friction and questions he couldn't fully answer came to the surface in the particular way that it can in men who carry authority in their bodies like a physical object. He walked toward her. The formation watched. His pace was deliberate, not rushed. The walk of a man who is about to say something in front of witnesses, which is always the walk of a man who has decided that what he's about to say is more important than the consequences of saying it publicly. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. She was 4 inches shorter. She didn't compensate for it in any way that most people would have noticed. She simply stood the way she always stood. Voss looked at her uniform. His eyes moved to the qualification badge on her chest, a standard issue grade that identified her as certified for the range-adjacent roles within the review protocol. He reached out. His hand closed around the badge. He pulled. The fabric tore slightly at the pin backing. The sound of it was very small and very loud at the same time. He held the badge in his fist at his side. 42 people watched. "Prove you deserve that uniform," he said. His voice was flat and absolute, the voice of a man accustomed to that flatness having a particular effect on people who heard it. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm looking at a paper officer with a temporary assignment code and a review mandate that nobody on this base asked for. I have operators in this formation who have bled for what they're wearing. I want to know what you've done." The silence after was genuine. 42 people who had all experienced at various levels the specific reality of being expected to prove themselves in front of others. They knew how this moment was supposed to go. They were waiting for the thing that always came next. The visible crack, the scramble for composure, the defensive response that confirmed the power structure had worked as intended. Maya did not move. She looked at him for a moment that was long enough to be its own statement. Then she said, "Sir, I'd like to return my badge, please." He blinked. "Sir," she said again calmly. "The badge. It's government property. I'd like it back." He stared at her. She held out her hand. Open palm. Completely steady. Nobody in that formation breathed. Voss placed the badge in her hand. She looked at it for a moment, a brief inventory checking the condition. Then she looked back at him. "If you'd like to discuss the review findings to date, sir, I'd be glad to schedule a formal briefing. I think what I've found in the last 2 weeks would answer your question better than anything I could say right now." She held his gaze. "But I want to be honest with you. The answer to your question, what have I done, is classified at a level you're not currently read into. So this conversation has a ceiling that I didn't build and can't remove. The sun pressed down on all of them. A fly crossed the space between them, and nobody watched it. You can request a brief from my originating command, Maya said. I actually encourage that. I think it would be useful for both of us. She pinned the badge back to her chest, using a calm, practiced motion that somehow made the gesture feel like the most significant thing that had happened in that formation all morning. Then she stepped back, returned to her position at the perimeter, and opened her notebook. Carver looked at Voss. The selection candidates looked at each other. Senior Petty Officer Grange, a 12-year veteran, standing third from the left in the front row. Later said that in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt since his first selection course. The specific physical sensation of realizing that you are in the presence of something you don't yet have the vocabulary to name. He said it felt like watching a locked door, and suddenly understanding that the lock was on the inside. Voss walked back to the formation. He finished the inspection. He didn't look at her again. But every person there knew in the particular way that military people come to know things, not through announcement, not through documentation, not through rank, that whatever. Lieutenant Maya Reeves she was not what any of them had thought she was when she walked through the gate 11 days ago with a temporary assignment code and a soft access badge. The question now, the one that spread quietly through the evening meal that night, through the barrack hallways, and the smoking area behind the motor pool, was not whether Maya Reeves deserved her uniform. The question was whether Commander Voss had any idea what he had just done by asking. And the answer, though nobody knew it yet, was no. He had absolutely no idea. The question spread the way. Questions always spread on military installations, not through official channels, not through formal announcements, but through the invisible network of people who had been standing in the right place at the right moment, and who understood at some cellular level that what they had witnessed was not a routine inspection correction. It moved through the dining facility, and through the duty roster rotation, and through the quiet hour before lights out, when soldiers stopped performing and started talking, and by the time the sun came up the next morning, everyone on base who mattered had heard some version of it. Most of the versions were wrong. The version that Sergeant First Class Danny Kowalski heard delivered by his bunkmate Reyes at 0515, while they both laced their boots in the dark, was that some paper-pushing female lieutenant from a review committee had mouthed off to Commander Voss in front of the formation and somehow not been immediately removed from the installation. Reyes framed it as a curiosity, as something mildly entertaining in the way that minor institutional friction can be entertaining when it doesn't directly affect you. Kowalski didn't say anything. He finished lacing his boots and thought about the previous afternoon when he had gone back to the range for an individual practice session and found a correction note in his training file that hadn't been there the morning before. The note was precise. It identified the specific finger placement error in his grip that had been compounding across his entire time at Echo, named it correctly as a Phase 1 instruction artifact, and recommended a remediation protocol that Kowalski had never seen documented anywhere in the standard training materials, but which, when he tried it on the dry-fire dummy in the equipment room, produced a grip stability that felt entirely different from anything he had built over the previous months. It felt correct in a way that made him realize with the particular discomfort of genuine recognition that nothing before it had been. He didn't know who had written the note, but he had a suspicion. Maya arrived at the operations building at 0650 and found that her secondary workstation access had been restricted. The screen accepted her credentials and then displayed a single line of text informing her that her access had been modified pending a security review initiated by the station commander. She stood in front of the screen for a moment. Then she sat down, pulled out her notebook, and began writing. Corporal Hines. The duty clerk watched her from across the room with the anxious expression of someone who has been told to do something they find professionally uncomfortable and doesn't know how to pretend otherwise. Lieutenant, he said finally, I'm sorry about the commander's office sent the modification request last night. I just processed what came through. That's your job, Maya said without looking up from the notebook. You did it correctly. Hines blinked. Do you need anything I can pull physical files for anything in the review scope? The restriction is on the network access, not the physical. I know, Maya said. That's fine, Corporal. Thank you. She kept writing. What she wrote was a formal notification to Torres, structured as a routine observation log update, but carrying within its language a specific coded flag that indicated a material escalation in the review conditions. She had used the flag twice before in her career. Both times the response had come within 6 hours. She was not anxious about the access restriction. She was interested in it. Because a station commander restricting a review team's system access was not a routine administrative action. It was a decision with consequences that Voss, in his certainty about his own position, might not have fully calculated. It was the kind of decision that generated a paper trail in the exact direction you didn't want a paper trail to go when someone was already documenting your decisions. She was almost impressed by how cleanly he had handed her the next chapter. The first person to say anything directly to Maya that wasn't operationally necessary was Senior Petty Officer Grange. He found her at the edge of the physical training area at 0730 during the window between the morning run formation and the start of range operations, when most people were transitioning, and the institutional attention was distributed enough that a conversation could happen without becoming a public event. He was a careful man. Maya had noticed that about him from the first day, the way he positioned himself in rooms, the way he listened during briefings, the specific economy of his movements that suggested someone who thought several steps ahead as a matter of instinct rather than effort. He stopped near her. He didn't sit. He looked out at the track. "You wrote the correction note for Kowalski," he said. Not a question. "The note is in the file," Maya said. "You wrote it." She didn't confirm or deny. She waited. Grange was quiet for a moment. "I've been here 3 cycles. That error has been in his file for 2 of them. Every range officer who's looked at it has documented it as a candidate performance issue. Nobody identified the source." "The source is fairly clear if you're looking for it," Maya said. "Most people aren't looking for it." He paused. "Most people here are evaluating outcomes. Nobody's evaluating how the outcomes were built." Maya turned to look at him for the first time in the conversation. He was looking at the track still, his jaw set, his hands clasped behind his back, in the automatic resting posture of a senior enlisted man who had spent enough years in uniform that it no longer required conscious thought. "That's an interesting observation," she said. "I'm an interesting person," Grange said flatly. The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. 3 cycles, she said. "What have you seen in 3 cycles?" He looked at her then. He assessed her for a moment, with eyes that had the particular quality of someone who had spent a long time deciding who deserved honesty and had become very precise about the criteria. "Things I can't prove," he said. "Tell me anyway." I was quiet for another 5 seconds. Then he said, "Candidates who wash out here, the ones who fail qualification by thin margins. Some of them have something in common that doesn't show up in the official assessment. The failures cluster. Not randomly. They cluster around certain training officer assignments in Phase 2. The candidates assigned to Hansen have a statistically higher washout rate than the base average. Higher than any other training officer on station. By a margin that if you were paying attention, you'd notice." Maya said nothing. "But nobody's paying attention to that," Grange said. "Because the program's numbers look fine from the top. Overall graduation rates are within parameters. Individual officer variance gets attributed to candidate population differences. It's explainable. It doesn't look like anything except normal variation unless you're comparing it against the pre-assignment assessment scores." "Which show what?" Maya said. "That the candidates assigned to Hansen's section don't start with lower scores than the others," Grange said. "They arrive with equivalent or better scores. They just don't finish that way." The silence between them had weight. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya said. Grange looked back at the track. "Because Kowalski is one of the best candidates this station has seen in 2 years. I've been watching him. He has everything. And he's going to wash out in 5 days unless someone does something about a grip error that your correction note correctly identified, and that Hansen had 3 months to catch and didn't." He started walking away. "Grange," Maya said. He stopped. Document what you told me. Dates, observations, specific candidate names. Whatever you can recall with precision. Don't give it to me yet. Just write it down and put it somewhere secure. He didn't turn around. Already started, he said, and he walked away. Maya stood there for a moment after he left. The training track was emptying as candidates moved toward the day's first station. The sun was already generating heat that pressed against exposed skin like a deliberate force. She noted the wind direction from the movement of fabric on a distant fence line. She noted the position of a cloud formation that told her something about afternoon conditions. Then she walked back toward the operations building, and her mind was running through what Grange had just told her with the specific focused quality of attention that she reserved for information that confirmed something she had already half suspected but hadn't yet been able to name. She had suspected individual inconsistency in the training assessment. What Grange was describing was something more deliberate than inconsistency. That distinction changed things considerably. Commander Voss spent the morning in back-to-back meetings and did not appear on the range floor. This was itself a deviation from his normal pattern, which Maya had already logged as consistent. He typically made at least one range floor appearance before noon. His absence suggested he was managing something administratively, which was consistent with the system access restriction he had initiated the previous night, and which suggested in turn that he had been in contact with someone above his own position about the review team's presence. She was curious who that contact was. She found out at 11:40 when Torres sent her an encrypted message that read in its entirety. Admiral Crane's office made contact with originating command at 0800. Request for review scope clarification. Response provided. Hold your position. Maya read the message twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket and felt the specific settled quality of someone who has just watched a situation do exactly what they expected it to do. Admiral Crane was the regional command authority above Echo Station. He was also according to the preliminary review data Torres had compiled before Maya's deployment. One of 3 flag officers whose signature appeared on a series of administrative decisions over the past 4 years that had created the structural conditions for what Maya was now observing on the ground. She hadn't known how prominently he would figure into the active dynamics of the situation. Now she did. This was no longer a training standards review. This was a protected operation. And someone somewhere was starting to understand that. The range exercise that afternoon was a precision shooting assessment, the third of 4 required for Phase 3 candidates. Maya had clearance to observe from the upper deck, and she was there when the assessment began. Notebook in hand, watching through the measured stillness she brought to all observation tasks. She watched 12 candidates cycle through the stations. She watched Hansen move through the range floor below her. She watched the specific pattern of where he paused, how long he spent at each candidate's position, what he wrote on his scoring sheet, relative to what she could observe about the candidate's actual technical performance. She had brought a scope, a personal one compact, not issued, and she used it periodically to confirm what she was observing from distance. What she saw in Hansen's scoring pattern was not subtle once you were looking for it. It was, in fact, extraordinarily clear. The pattern was simple and almost elegant in its simplicity. Candidates who struggled with a specific technical element that Hansen had personally introduced in their Phase 2 instruction received scoring penalties in their Phase 3 assessment that were attributed to execution failures. Failures that were real in the sense that the candidates were genuinely not executing correctly, but which were real precisely because Hansen had spent 3 months teaching them the wrong thing. The wrong technique was then used to measure them against a standard they couldn't meet because the instruction had made meeting it impossible. It was not a random failure. It was a manufactured one. The question, the one that had been forming in Maya's mind across 2 weeks and was now crystallizing into something she could state with precision, was why. Not why individual candidates failed. Why certain candidates failed. What they had in common. What characteristic or set of characteristics made them the ones who ended up in Hansen's section with a technique error baked into their foundation. She was still holding that question when the range exercise ended and the candidates filed back toward the assessment staging area. That was when Kowalski stepped out of the line, I wasn't supposed to. It was a direct break from the end of exercise protocol, and it created an immediate reaction from the range officer nearest him, who said his name sharply and took a step toward him. Kowalski held up one hand, not a gesture of defiance, a gesture of someone who is about to do something and needs 3 seconds to do it, and then he turned and looked directly up at the observation deck. He looked directly at Maya. From that distance, she couldn't read his expression in detail. But she could read the intention in the specific way he was standing, and what it said was, "I tried your correction, and I want you to know I tried it." The range officer reached him and said something Maya couldn't hear. Kowalski nodded and stepped back into the line. Maya lowered her scope. She wrote one sentence in her notebook. Candidate demonstrates adaptive capacity under adverse instruction conditions. Note for record. Then she closed the notebook. The call came at 1900. Not to her phone. To the base communications desk, which patched it through to the duty officer who sent a runner to find Maya at the dining facility and inform her that she had a priority communication waiting in the secure room adjacent to the main operations center. Maya thanked the runner, finished what she was eating, and walked to the secure room. The voice on the other end of the encrypted line was one she hadn't heard in 14 months. It was measured and quiet, the kind of voice that had learned to convey significance through understatement, because understatement in certain contexts was more effective than volume. "How complicated is it?" the voice asked. "More than the initial brief suggested," Maya said. "It's not an assessment quality problem. There's a pattern of selective candidate failure that correlates with specific instructor assignment. I need 3 more days to complete the documentation." A pause. Crane's office made contact. "I know. That changes your timeline." "It accelerates it," Maya said. "Which I think is fine. Pressure from above is going to generate behavior from Voss that will be useful to document." Another pause. Longer. "How are you?" "I'm good." "You sound like you're good." "I am." Voss made a scene. "He made an error," Maya said. "Which I now have 42 witnesses for." The voice on the other end of the line did something that was almost a laugh. Not quite. 3 days then." 3 days, Maya confirmed. The line closed. She sat in the secure room for another moment, in the silence that followed disconnection, which was always its own specific kind of quiet. Then she stood and walked back out into the evening. What she didn't know was that Carver had followed the runner. Not closely enough to hear the communication or identify the secure room she'd used, but close enough to confirm that she'd received a priority call and that the call had lasted 11 minutes. He noted the time. He noted her expression when she emerged from the corridor, unhurried, clear, the same settled quality she carried everywhere. He watched her walk back toward the barracks, and then he went directly to Voss's office. Voss was still at his desk. This itself was notable. It was past 1900, and Voss was not typically a late office man. He was a man who maintained physical discipline and regular rhythms, because he believed those rhythms were the foundation of command authority. The fact that he was still at his desk told Carver that Crane's office had said something that afternoon that had knocked his commander off his normal rhythm. Carver told him about the call. Voss listened without expression. When Carver finished, Voss said, 11 minutes. "Yes, sir." "Priority channel." "Yes, sir." The duty officer confirmed it was routed through the secure communications infrastructure, not a standard call. Voss was quiet for a moment. "Pull her personnel jacket, whatever we can access at our clearance level." Carver hesitated. "Sir, the jacket is flagged for restricted access. We can see the basic demographic and assignment history, but the operational..." "Pull what we can see." "Yes, sir." Carver left. Voss sat at his desk and looked at the wall for a long time. The personnel jacket that Carver pulled 30 minutes later contained the following visible information. Maya Reeves, Lieutenant, United States Army, 11 years of service assignment history, showing a sequence of temporary duty rotations across a variety of installations, none of which were special operations commands, and none of which were classified facilities, punctuated at regular intervals by administrative designations that read simply, TDY duty station, not listed. Not listed, Voss said. That's all the system shows for those periods, sir, Carver said. The designation exists in several cleared personnel systems for people attached to certain programs that... I know what the designation means, Voss said. He did. He had seen it before. Twice. Both times it had been on the jacket of a person who turned out to be assigned to a program he didn't have access to. Both times the person had been substantially more senior in operational terms than their rank suggested. He looked at the jacket for another long moment. How many TDY periods, he said. Carver counted. 7, sir. Over 11 years. The shortest is 4 months. The longest is it doesn't have an end date listed. Voss set the jacket down. He had made 2 mistakes. He understood now. The first was restricting her system access, which had been an administrative escalation that would be documented and visible. The second was the formation incident, which had 42 witnesses, all of whom were selection candidates, whose perception of the command environment was itself a documented element of the assessment criteria. He had made both mistakes in the span of 24 hours. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Get me Admiral Crane's office in the morning." "Yes, sir." "And Carver." Voss looked at him. "Restore her system access tonight. Frame it as a technical correction." Carver blinked. "Sir." "The access restriction. Restore it. Tonight." Carver left without another word. Maya's workstation access was restored at 21:14. She was already in her bunk when the notification came through to her phone. She read it. She set the phone face down on the footlocker beside her bunk. She looked at the ceiling. In the bunk across from her, a junior specialist named Lim, who was on her second week at the installation and had managed to remain entirely uninvolved in everything happening around her, stirred and said without opening her eyes, "You ever sleep?" "Sometimes," Maya said. "Seems like a useful habit." "It is." A pause. "Are you in trouble?" Lim said, still without opening her eyes. Maya considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I don't think so." "Okay." Lim pulled her blanket up. "Because the way people on this base look at you makes me think either you're in a lot of trouble or you're someone very important and nobody knows it yet." Maya didn't answer that. After a moment, Lim said, "I'm going with the second one." And she went to sleep. Maya lay in the and thought about Grange's words, about the clustering pattern of failures, about the candidates whose names she had been quietly documenting. She thought about Kowalski stepping out of the line to look up at the observation deck. She thought about the specific shape of what she was building here, and the specific way it was going to land when she was done building it. She thought about the fact that Voss had restored her access. Not because he respected her. Not because he had revised his opinion of who she was or what she deserved. He had restored it because he was now afraid of what his own behavior was generating in the record. Fear Maya had learned over 11 years and 7. TDY rotations into programs that didn't have official names was a reliable indicator of guilt. Genuine confidence didn't modify access and then restore it 12 hours later. Genuine confidence didn't send a personnel clerk to pull a restricted jacket at 7 in the evening. Genuine confidence didn't call Admiral Crane's office and create a documentation trail pointing directly back at itself. Genuine confidence looked like a woman lying in a bunk in the overflow barracks, watching the ceiling, thinking through the next 72 hours with the unhurried precision of someone who had already done the hardest version of this exact thing and come out the other side. She thought about the last thing Torres had said in his message, "Hold your position." She was holding it. She had been holding it for 11 years. The morning run formation at 0530 was larger than usual. Word had traveled as it always traveled, and the candidates who had been present for the formation incident 24 hours earlier had communicated something to their cohort that had generated in the people who hadn't been there a need to be proximate to whatever was happening. Not everyone could articulate why they'd shown up early, or why they positioned themselves on the near side of the track closest to wherever Maya usually stood. They just did it. Maya ran with them. She hadn't been invited to run formation. She hadn't been excluded. There was simply no formal framework for her participation, which meant she could choose, and she chose to run. She ran at the pace of the formation, which was a solid pace, and she didn't speak to anyone, and nobody spoke to her. But by the 3rd kilometer, something in the specific quality of the silence around her had changed. It was no longer the silence of people, ignoring or uncertain. It was something closer to the silence that forms around someone you've decided at some level, below conscious articulation, to pay attention to. Grange, running 3 positions to her left, said nothing. But at the 4-kilometer mark, without any prior discussion, the formation unconsciously tightened around her position. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone could have pointed to and named. But the space between her and the runners on either side of her closed by about half an arm's length, and it stayed closed for the remainder of the run. It was the smallest possible thing. It was also not nothing. When they finished the run and the formation broke for transition, Kowalski appeared at her shoulder. He was breathing hard. His face was doing the complicated thing that faces do when someone is trying to figure out how to say something they're not sure they have the right to say. "The correction note," he said finally. "Yes," Maya said. "It's right." He exhaled. "I mean, it fixed it. Or it's going to fix it. It's going to take repetition to override the old pattern, but the principle is right, and I can feel it, and I just—" He stopped, regrouped. "I don't know who you are," he said. "But you looked at my file and figured out in one observation something that nobody in 2 cycles has." "Don't thank me yet," Maya said. "You still have to pass qualification." "I know. The remediation protocol takes consistent application, at least 40 repetitions on the dry fire before you go back to live round assessment. Do you have access to the equipment room in the evening?" "I can get it." "Then get it," she said. "Every evening until assessment day. Don't skip one." He looked at her for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" She picked up her water bottle. "Because you're good," she said simply. "And someone made it harder than it needed to be." She walked toward the shower block. Behind her, Kowalski stood on the track for another moment, and Reyes, who had been nearby throughout, walked up to him and said quietly, "Who is she?" Kowalski shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "But I think we've been asking the wrong question." Reyes looked at him. "What's the right question?" Kowalski watched Maya's retreating figure. "Not who she is," he said. "What she's here to do." And across the base in his office, Commander Voss picked up his phone and placed a call to Admiral Crane's office, and the conversation that followed would have its own consequences. And those consequences were already moving toward all of them, with the quiet inevitability of something that had been set in motion before any of them arrived at this installation. Before any of them understood what was actually at stake. Before anyone except Maya had the full picture of what the next 72 hours were going to reveal. She had 3 days. She didn't need 3 days. But she was going to use all of them. The 72 hours Maya had given herself began to compress on the morning of the 2nd day when Torres sent a message that contained exactly 4 words. Crane moved the timeline. She read it standing outside the secure communications room phone held at her side, and she thought for exactly 3 seconds about what that meant and what it required of her. Then she walked to the operations building, sat down at her restored workstation, and began pulling every file she hadn't yet accessed. She worked for 4 hours without stopping. What she built during those 4 hours was not a report. Not yet. It was a structure, a documented architecture of decisions dates, assignment records, scoring modifications, and administrative actions that, taken individually, could each be explained away, and taken together, could not be explained at all. She had done this before in different configurations, in different institutional contexts, and the thing she had learned across 11 years of doing it was that corruption rarely looked like corruption from the inside. From the inside, it looked like normal operations that had simply drifted over time toward outcomes that benefited certain people and harmed certain others. And the people running it had almost always convinced themselves that the drift was legitimate, that their adjustments were necessary, that the system they were protecting was worth the cost of the people it was quietly destroying. She had stopped finding that belief interesting. She found it useful because people who believed they were justified rarely covered their tracks as carefully as people who knew they were wrong. The first document that made the structure undeniable was a scoring modification record she found buried in a sub-archive of Phase 2 assessment data. It was a routine administrative form, the kind of form that nobody looked at because it existed to document corrections to data entry errors. She had been through 214 of them before she found the one that mattered. It was dated 11 months earlier. The original score entry was for a candidate named Marcus Webb, an assessment score of 91, which was in the top 7th percentile for the cycle. The correction reduced it to 73. The stated reason was data entry error. The authorizing signature was Hansen's. 73 was below the Phase 3 advancement threshold. Webb had washed out. She pulled Webb's full file. His pre-assignment scores were in the top 10% of his entry cohort. His physical assessment metrics were above standard in every category. His peer evaluations from Phase 1 were exceptional. The only documentation of performance problems appeared in Phase 2 under Hansen's section, where a series of instructor notes described a progressive consistency issue under evaluation conditions that had no antecedent in anything Webb had produced before arriving in that section. She pulled the next flagged name from Grange's verbal account, then the next, then the one after that. By the time she finished, she had 7 files with the same architecture. Pre-assignment excellence. Phase 2 assignment to Hansen. Progressive documented consistency issues. Assessment scores that declined in precise staged increments. Washout. 7 candidates. 4 cycles. 91% of them from the same demographic background. She sat with that last number for a moment. Then she picked up her notebook and wrote one sentence. This is not a training quality problem. She was still at the workstation when Carver walked in at 1100. He stopped when he saw the volume of files she had open. He stood in the doorway and looked at her screen for a moment, and she could see him running a calculation, how much she had accessed, how long she had been there, what the shape of that volume of accessed material implied about where the review was heading. "Lieutenant," he said. "Carver," she said without looking up. "The commander wants to know if you'll be available for a briefing at 1300. She looked up then. "What kind of briefing?" He didn't specify. She held his gaze for a moment. Carver was not a bad man. She had concluded that early. He was a man who was loyal to a structure that had rewarded his loyalty and who had not yet been required to understand the full nature of what that structure was doing. The way he was standing in the doorway, the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful neutrality of his expression, told her that he was beginning to understand it now. That the understanding was uncomfortable and new, and hadn't yet resolved itself into a decision about what to do with it. "Tell him yes," she said. 1300. Carver nodded. He almost left. Then he stopped in the doorway and said without turning around, "The candidates are talking about you." "I know," Maya said. "Kowalski went back to the range last night. Did a dry fire session for 2 hours after lights out. Hines saw him on the equipment room camera." Maya said nothing. "Hansen's going to notice," Carver said quietly. "I know that too," Maya said. Carver left. She turned back to her screen and kept working, but part of her attention had shifted toward the 1300 briefing and the question of what Voss intended to do with it. There were several options. He could be attempting a formal administrative challenge to her review mandate, trying to establish a procedural basis for restricting or terminating her access through legitimate channels. He could be attempting a direct confrontation now that he had more information from Crane's office. He could be attempting something else entirely, something she hadn't anticipated. She ran through the scenarios while she worked. The one she didn't consider because it seemed too straightforward turned out to be the correct one. At 1300, she walked into the briefing room and found Voss seated at the head of the table, which was normal, and Carver seated to his left, which was normal, and Admiral Crane appearing via secure video link on the screen at the far end of the room, which was not normal at all. She stopped for 1/2 second when she saw Crane's face on the screen. Then she continued to her chair and sat down. Crane looked exactly like his personnel photograph. A heavy-set man in his late 60s, with the specific facial architecture of someone who had spent decades being the most powerful person in most rooms. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize, which was itself informative. Most people in positions of significant institutional authority were legible to her within the first few seconds. Crane was doing something more deliberate with his face than most people did, which meant he knew how to manage what he communicated and had decided to manage it carefully with her. That was interesting. "Lieutenant Reeves," Crane said. His voice through the video connection was slightly processed, but carried its natural timbre well enough. "I wanted to speak with you directly." "Admiral," she said, "I've been reviewing the communication between your originating command and my office this morning." He paused. "I want to make sure we're all working from the same understanding of this review's scope and authority." "I think that's a productive goal, sir," Maya said. Voss to her left said nothing. His hands were flat on the table. "The review was authorized at the Joint Committee level," Crane said. "That's clear. What's less clear to me is the reporting chain. Specifically, who receives the final review findings." Maya looked at him steadily. "The findings go to the authorizing committee, sir." "Which reports to?" "The committee is jointly constituted," Maya said. "It reports through multiple chains simultaneously. I can provide the committee charter to you, sir. It's not classified." A brief silence. "Lieutenant," Crane said, and his voice had found a new quality. Not aggressive, but calibrated, the voice of someone who is testing the boundaries of something. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" 11 years, sir. And in 11 years, you found what exactly systemic problems that needed institutional correction?" "Sometimes," she said. "And sometimes I find that institutions are functioning exactly as designed, even when the design has problems." Crane was quiet for a moment. "What are you finding here?" She looked at him across the table, across the video connection, across the specific charged air of a room where two of the three people present knew significantly more than the third had accounted for. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'd prefer to complete my documentation before providing preliminary findings to anyone outside the authorizing committee. That's standard protocol for the review process." "I'm asking you informally," Crane said. "I understand, sir. My answer is the same informally." The silence that followed that statement had a particular character. It was the silence of a man who was accustomed to that kind of protocol. Deflection being in practice, a social convention, something people said and then bypassed when sufficient rank asked them to bypass it. He was recalibrating in real time to the possibility that she was not going to bypass it. Voss shifted slightly in his chair. Crane said, "The committee's findings in previous reviews have come through my office before final distribution." "I wasn't aware of that, sir," Maya said. "That's not reflected in the protocol I'm operating under." Another silence. "I'll look into that," Crane said. "I'd appreciate that, sir," Maya said. "If there's a documented precedent, I'd like to understand it so I can ensure this review follows appropriate procedure." The meeting ended 17 minutes later. Voss walked Crane out of the connection, a brief courtesy exchange that Maya watched from her seat without participating in, and then the screen went dark and the room was three people again. Voss sat down. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he said quietly to no one in particular, "He's going to try to have the findings routed through his office." Maya said yes. Voss looked at her. It was the first time he had looked at her since the formation incident, without any visible performance of command authority in his expression. What was there instead was something rawer and less curated. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "What did you find?" he said. She looked at him. "I can't share that outside the authorized channel, sir." "I'm the station commander." "Yes, sir. Whatever is in those files, whatever pattern you're documenting, it's on my installation, under my command." "Yes, sir," she said. "It is." He sat with that. She watched him sit with it, and understood that he was doing something genuinely difficult, revising a self-image. He had built his professional identity around the certainty that what happened at Echo was rigorous and honest and demanding in the ways that mattered. The possibility that something had been happening beneath that certainty in the architecture he had trusted to the people below him was not a comfortable possibility for a man like Voss. But discomfort, Maya had learned, was not the same as denial. "What do The possibility that something had been happening beneath that certainty in the architecture he had trusted to the people below him was not a comfortable possibility for a man like Voss. But discomfort, Maya had learned, was not the same as denial. "What do you need?" he said finally. She considered him for a moment. "I need 3 things, sir. I need access to Hansen's personnel file, including all previous installations. I need the original scoring data from the last 4 cycles before any administrative modification. And I need you to not contact Admiral Crane's office again before I complete my documentation." Voss was very still. "That last one," he said. "That's asking me to." "It's asking you to let the process finish, sir," she said. "That's all." He looked at the wall again. A long moment. Then he said, "Carver, get her the files." Carver left without a word. Voss stood up. He was at the door when he stopped. He didn't turn around. "The formation," he said. "Yesterday." "Sir? I shouldn't have—" He stopped, started again. "That was wrong." She said nothing. He left. The files Carver brought her at 14:30 confirmed the last piece she had needed. Hansen's personnel history showed 2 previous installations before Echo. At both of them, there were documented candidate performance anomalies in sections he supervised. At both of them, the anomalies had been closed as standard performance variation. At both of them, a review had been initiated and then quietly discontinued. She now knew why. Both previous reviews had been routed through Admiral Crane's office before final distribution. Both had produced findings that were significantly modified before they became official record. She photographed every page. She uploaded everything through the encrypted channel to Torres. Then she sent a message to the originating command that contained 3 words and a date. "Ready, move now." The response came in 40 minutes. 2 words, 72 hours. She was in the middle of composing a follow-up when the door to the operations room opened and Hansen walked in. She had not expected him. He stood in the doorway with the compact physical precision she had noticed on the range floor, his expression doing something that was carefully constructed to appear casual. He looked at her. Then he looked at the files stacked beside her workstation. Then he looked at her again. "Lieutenant Reeves," he said. "Hansen," she said. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, did not sit. "I understand you've been reviewing candidate files," he said. "That's the scope of the review, yes. Specifically Phase 2 assessment records." "Among other things," she said. Howe was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet, she could see him assessing running the same kind of calculation. Carver had run in the doorway that morning, but with different information and different stakes. He knew more than Carver. That was visible in the specific quality of his stillness. Carver had been uncertain. Hansen was not uncertain. Hansen knew exactly what was in those Phase 2 records, and he was here because he had found out through whatever channel he had found out through that she had been in them all morning. "What exactly are you looking for?" he said. "Assessment consistency," she said. "Standard review scope." "Right." He took 2 steps into the room. "And what have you found?" She looked at him directly. "I can't discuss review findings outside the authorized reporting structure. I'm a training officer. The Phase 2 records are part of my assigned function." "They are," she agreed. "So if there's an issue with the Phase 2 assessment data, I should be aware of." "Hansen," she said. He stopped. "You should talk to a lawyer," she said quietly. The room went completely still. He stared at her. She held his gaze with the same unhurried steadiness she brought to everything, and she watched the specific sequence of changes that moved through his expression over the next several seconds. First, the reflex of denial, then the calculation of how much she might actually know versus how much she was implying, then the deeper and more uncomfortable recognition that the 2 amounts might be the same. "I don't know what you think you found," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at the files again, then at her, then he left. She listened to his footsteps in the corridor until they disappeared. Then she turned back to her screen and kept working, but she flagged the interaction immediately in her observation log with a timestamp and a note that read, "Subject made direct contact following file access. Behavior consistent with awareness of exposure." She sent the flag to Torres. Torres responded in 4 minutes. Noted. Move faster. She was moving as fast as she could. The afternoon range session was a standard exercise, not an assessed one, and she watched it from the observation deck with a focus that was different from her previous observation sessions. She was no longer building the picture. She had the picture. What she was watching now was the way the picture moved in real time, the way Hansen interacted with his candidates, the specific quality of that interaction, now that she had seen everything underneath it. Kowalski was in the session. She watched him on the line. He was using the corrected grip. It was visible even from the observation deck, the subtle change in his hold position, the way the rifle settled differently into his shoulder. He was not hitting everything perfectly. The remediation was still working its way through the muscle memory, overriding a pattern that had been built across months of repeated error. But the direction was right. She could see it in the way the gun moved versus the way it had moved before. Hansen noticed it too. She watched him stop behind Kowalski, watched him say something, watched Kowalski's shoulders tighten fractionally and then deliberately release. Watched Kowalski fire the next round. It hit center. She could not hear what happened next from the deck, but she could see Hansen's posture change. A very slight adjustment that on a man who carried himself with the consistent physical control Hansen did was the equivalent of someone else flinching visibly. He moved on without another word. Kowalski fired the next round. Center again. Grange, standing 2 positions down the line, didn't look over. But she saw his jaw move in the smallest possible expression of satisfaction. She wrote in her notebook, "Remediation effective. Candidate trajectory altered." Then she added, 3 rounds to 0. This one's going to be fine. At 18:30, she was back at the workstation when Torres sent a new message. It was longer than his usual communications, which itself told her something before she read the content. Torres was economical. When he used more words than necessary, the excess was always load-bearing. The message said Crane's office made a second contact with originating command 40 minutes ago. Request was to identify the review team lead by name and provide service record summary. Originating command denied the request under the review protocol. Crane's office is now making a formal inquiry through the IG chain. This is being tracked. Your timeline has changed. You now have 36 hours. She read it twice. Then she looked at the files she still had to complete. 36 hours was tight. Not impossible, but tight in a way that required her to make choices about what she documented fully and what she documented in summary form. And she didn't like making those choices, because summary documentation was what gave institutional lawyers the space to argue ambiguity later. She had built this case on the specific, and she needed it to stay specific. She sent Torres a single question. "Can you move the authentication team forward?" He came back in 3 minutes, working on it. She kept working. At 2000, Grange found her at the edge of the physical training track again. Same position as before, same deliberate casual approach. He had a paper cup of coffee, which he offered to her. She took it. "Hansen's talking to people," Grange said. "I know. He went to 2 of the senior training officers after the range session. I couldn't get close enough to hear it directly, but the body language said he was managing," Maya said. "Getting ahead of something." "Yeah." Grange held his own cup with both hands. "He went to Carver too." "Carver won't give him anything," Maya said. Grange glanced at her. "You sure about that?" "Carver already made his decision," she said. "He just hasn't announced it yet." Grange considered that. "How do you read people that fast?" "I pay attention," she said. "Everybody pays attention." "No," she said. "Most people think they're paying attention, but they're actually just confirming what they already believe. Paying attention means being willing to find something different from what you expected." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you find that you didn't expect?" She thought about it seriously. "Voss," she said. "I expected him to be the center of it. He's not. He's a man who built something real and then handed pieces of it to people he trusted without looking closely enough at what they were doing with it. That's a different problem from what I thought I was coming here for." "Is it a worse problem?" "No," she said. "It's a more salvageable one." Grange looked at the track. Kowalski's going to make it, isn't he? If he keeps going the way he went today, Maya said. Yes. And the others, Webb Santos, the ones who already washed out. Their records will be corrected, she said. Grange turned to look at her fully for the first time in the conversation. You can do that. The review can recommend it, she said. The command has to act on it, but yes. He let out a slow breath. 7 people, he said. 7 careers. Yes, she said quietly. He stood there for a moment. Then he said, You know, when I first saw you at that workstation the first day, I thought you were exactly what Voss thought you were. I know, Maya said. What changed my mind was watching you at the observation deck during the range session. The scope you had. Personal equipment not issued. And the way you used it. You weren't watching candidates. You were reading the range floor like... He stopped. Like what? She said. He looked at her carefully. Like someone who has been in the position they were watching from, he said. Not as an observer, as someone who has done the actual thing and is reading it from memory. The evening had gone quiet around them. Somewhere across the installation, a vehicle engine turned over and then settled. Maya looked at the track and said nothing. The TDY designation's in your file, Grange said. I have a friend in personnel. He owes me a favor. I didn't ask him to look you up, he added quickly. But I know what those designations mean. Grange, she said. I know, he said. Forget I said it. 7 designations, she said quietly after a moment. 7 places I can't talk about. 7 things I don't need to talk about to do this job. I know, he said. But since you're being honest, she said. And there was something in her voice that was different from the measured quality she maintained in professional contexts. Something, a fraction warmer, a fraction less contained. Yes, the scope isn't the only thing I know how to use. Grange nodded slowly. He finished his coffee. The authentication team, he said. When they get here, is that going to be the end of it? The beginning of the end, she said. The documentation I've built is the case. The authentication makes it unimpeachable. After that it goes to the committee, and it doesn't come back through Crane's office. And Hansen. Hansen is fully documented, she said. 7 candidates, 4 cycles a modification record that has his signature on a scoring change that turned a 91 into a 73. Grange made a sound that wasn't quite a word. That's what I thought, Maya said. He stood to leave. Then he stopped, same as Carver had stopped in the doorway that morning, and she thought for a moment that everyone on this installation was going to spend the rest of this week stopping in doorways and corridors to say the thing they almost didn't say. That formation, Grange said. Yesterday, when he pulled the badge. He paused. The way you stood. I've been in for 18 years. I've seen officers dress down in front of formations more times than I can count. Most of them, even the good ones, something shows. Some physical response. Just a fraction. You didn't. I was concentrating, Maya said. On what? She looked at the track. On the fact that he had just made my job significantly easier, she said. And that 42 people were going to remember it. Grange stared at her for a moment. Then he said very quietly, God, you're good at this. And he walked away. She stood there for another moment, in the specific quiet that follows a conversation that has gone somewhere neither person fully expected. Then she turned and walked back toward the operations building, because she had 26 files left to complete, and 36 hours to do it in, and the authentication team was moving, and Crane's office was pushing, and Hansen was somewhere on the base, managing something that was about to stop being manageable. And none of that was going to wait for her to finish standing in the evening quiet, feeling the particular weight of a story that had been running for 11 years and was finally reaching its last chapter. She had 36 hours. She was going to use every one of them. She worked through the night. Not because she had to, not entirely, but because the 36-hour window Torres had given her had already compressed by the time she got back to the workstation, and the files she had left were the ones that required the most precise handling. The ones where the pattern was clear to her, but needed to be documented in language that left no interpretive space, No room for an institutional lawyer to insert the word arguably between the evidence and its conclusion. She had learned that lesson the hard way years ago in a context she couldn't discuss. The most carefully constructed institutional misconduct always lived in the gap between what was documented and what could be proven by what was documented. Her job was to close that gap completely, and closing it completely meant language, and language took time, and she didn't have as much of it as she wanted. At 0200, Carver knocked on the operations room door. She had not expected anyone to be awake at 0200 except herself, and she looked up with a neutrality that cost her slightly more effort than usual. Carver was in civilian clothes. The particular civilian clothes that military people wear when they're off-duty, but still on base. The clothes that say I am technically resting, but the institution never fully lets go. He looked like a man who had been lying in his bunk doing math and had eventually decided that the math was more important than sleep. He held 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her without being asked. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" she said. He sat down across from her. He put his hands around his cup. He was quiet for a moment in the specific way of someone who has decided to say something and is choosing the exact form of it. "I've been at Echo for 3 years," he said. "I came here because Voss has a reputation. It's a real reputation. What he built here, the rigor, the standard, it's genuine. The men who make it through this program are genuinely better than the men who don't. I believed in that. I still believe in it." "Yes," Maya said. "But..." He looked at his cup. "But in 3 years I've seen things that I filed under. I didn't have good language for it. I filed it under tough program produces hard outcomes. I told myself that washout rates were supposed to be high. I told myself that the candidates who didn't make it probably weren't ready. And now," she said, "now I'm sitting here at 2 in the morning thinking about Marcus Webb." He looked up at her. "I watched that kid perform in Phase 1. He was a reason people noticed him. There was something in the way he moved through problems that you don't see very often. Controlled aggression. That's the phrase Voss uses for what he's looking for. Webb had it. Naturally. And then he went into Phase 2 and came out broken, and I told myself the program had found something we couldn't see earlier." He stopped. "Webb didn't break," Maya said quietly. "No," Carver said. "He was broken." The night outside was perfectly silent. Even on a military installation, 0200 had its own specific quality of quiet. "I need you to put that in writing," Maya said. "Your observations of Webb. Specific dates if you have them. Specific interactions you observed." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." She pushed a legal pad across the workstation toward him. He picked up a pen. He wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. When he pushed the pad back across to her, she read it without expression. Then she looked up and said, "This is good, Carver." "Will it be enough?" "It fills a gap I had," she said. "Dated direct observations from a senior officer who has no prior contact with the review team. Yes, it helps." He nodded. He stood. He looked at the stack of files beside her workstation, the way people look at things that represent a scale of work that suddenly feels real to them. "Is Voss going to be all right?" he said. She considered that question seriously. "That depends on what happens next," she said, "and on what he decides to do about what he now knows." Carver nodded slowly. "He's a good commander," he said. "I want you to know that. Whatever you found, he didn't build that part of it. He wouldn't have." "I know," Maya said. He left. She read his statement once more, then added it to the documentation stack. Then she kept working. At 0440, Torres sent her a message that made her set down her pen and sit very still for 30 seconds. "Authentication team arrives at 1400 today. Crane filed a formal IG inquiry at midnight. Inquiry is directed at the review team's methodology and authorization chain. IG office has been notified of the conflict of interest. Your originating command is managing. You need to be done before 1400. She picked up her pen. She worked faster. The sun came up, the way it always came up in Arizona, which was suddenly and with complete commitment, and she watched it happen through the window above the workstation without really seeing it. She was inside the documentation now, in the way she sometimes got inside things, the specific focused state where the surrounding world contracted to the dimensions of the problem directly in front of her, and everything else became peripheral and unimportant. She finished the last file at 0917. She sat back. She looked at what she had built across 22 hours of continuous work and felt the particular quality of satisfaction that came not from completion, but from precision, from knowing that what she had produced was exactly what the evidence supported, and not one sentence more or less. Then she encrypted the full documentation package and sent it to Torres. He confirmed receipt in 6 minutes. She closed the files. She walked to the dining facility, ate breakfast for the first time in 22 hours, and allowed herself to sit for a full 12 minutes without looking at anything in particular. At 10:30, everything began to move. The first thing that moved was Hansen. He had been building towards something since the previous afternoon when he walked into the operations room and she told him to talk to a lawyer. Whatever he had been building, whatever calculation he had been running about how much she knew versus how much she could prove versus how much time he had to manage the situation, resolved itself in the specific wrong direction. At 10:30, when he walked to Voss's office and said that he needed to file a formal complaint against the review team for unauthorized access to personnel records and intimidation of training staff. Voss looked at him for a long moment. He said, "What intimidation?" Hansen said, "She came onto the active range floor without authorization. She made comments to me in the operations room that implied she was targeting my assessment records specifically." Voss said, "She has authorization for range-adjacent observation. The access level covers it." Hansen said, "Sir, with respect, the scope of this review is being exceeded. I think we should—" "Hansen," Voss said. Hansen stopped. Voss looked at him with the specific expression of a man who has spent the last 16 hours revising his understanding of the thing he is looking at. "Did you modify a candidate scoring record 11 months ago, entry to entry, a data form?" Hansen went very still. "Because I pulled the modification records last night," Voss said, "after she requested them. And there is a form with your signature on it that reduced a 91 to a 73, on a candidate named Webb." "That was a data entry correction," Hansen said. "The original score was—" "Don't," Voss said. The word landed like a door closing. Hansen said nothing. "Don't stand in my office and tell me it was a data entry correction," Voss said. His voice had found the flat, absolute quality it used on the range floor, but turned inward. The voice of a man applying the same rigor to his own command that he had always claimed to apply to his candidates. "I pulled Webb's pre-phase scores. I pulled his Phase 1 evaluations. I pulled everything before he walked into your section. And then I pulled the Phase 2 record. And I'm asking you, as your commanding officer, to be honest with me about what happened to Marcus Webb." The silence in the office had the quality of something irreversible. Carver, who was sitting 3 feet outside the closed door and could hear every word through the gap at the bottom, later described that silence as the longest 20 seconds of his professional life. Then Hansen said, "I want to speak with the legal office." Voss looked at him. "Sir," Hansen added. "Get out of my office," Voss said quietly. Hansen left. Voss sat at his desk for 3 minutes. Then he picked up the phone and called the base legal officer. Then he called Carver in. "Find Lieutenant Reeves," he said. "Tell her I need to speak with her, not a briefing, privately." Maya was walking back from the dining facility when Carver intercepted her. She read his face before he said a word and knew that something had moved. She didn't ask what. She just walked with him to Voss's office. Voss was standing when she entered, which was different from every previous interaction. He was standing at the window, his back to her, and he turned when she came in and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something that had surrendered the performance of authority and was simply a person in a difficult place. "Webb," he said. "Yes," she said. "The modification record?" "Yes." "How many?" he said. 7 confirmed, she said. 4 cycles. The pattern is consistent and documented. The authorization chain on each modification traces to the same signatory. He looked at her. "Why didn't this show up in my oversight reviews?" Because the modification forms are archived in a subsystem that generates separate from the primary candidate assessment database, she said. Your oversight reviews pull from the primary. The subsystem is technically visible in the full data architecture, but only if you're specifically looking for it. Most commanders don't know it exists. But you knew it existed, he said. Yes, she said. Because you found it before, he said. She held his gaze. He nodded once, accepting the answer that wasn't spoken. What happens now? He said. The authentication team arrives at 1400, she said. They're an independent verification unit from the Joint Committee. They'll review my documentation against the source data and formally authenticate the findings. After authentication, the findings go directly to the committee. Not through Crane's office, he said. Not through Crane's office, she confirmed. I was quiet for a moment. Crane is going to push back. He's already pushing back, she said. He filed a formal IG inquiry last night. It's being managed. Voss looked at her with the particular expression of a man who is recalibrating the scale of something in real time. The IG inquiry is against the review team, against the review methodology, she said. It's a procedural challenge. The intent is to create a delay in the reporting chain long enough to route the findings through his office first. Can he do that? Not if the authentication completes today, she said. Once the findings are authenticated and transmitted, they're in the committee record. They can't be pulled back or modified. Voss sat down. Where does Crane figure into what you found? He said. Maya looked at him carefully. Sir, I can tell you that the pattern I documented at Echo is not isolated to Echo. The two previous installations where Hansen was assigned both had similar anomalies. Both had reviews that were initiated and then discontinued. The discontinuation in both cases was administratively managed through regional command. Voss's jaw tightened. Through Crane's office. She didn't confirm or deny. She simply let the implication stand. How long has this been happening? He said. Based on the earliest documentation I can tie to the pattern, she said, at least 6 years. He put his face in his hands for a moment. Not long. Just a moment. The specific brief gesture of a man who has just had the exact scale of the thing he trusted land on him all at once. Then he looked up. What do you need from me for the authentication? He said. Your direct authorization for the authentication team's access to the source data systems, she said. And your formal statement regarding the Hansen modification record and your command relationship to the subsystem oversight gap. You're asking me to go on record, he said. I'm asking you to tell the truth, she said, about what you knew and when you knew it and what the gap in your oversight was. That's different from asking you to take responsibility for what Hansen did. You're not responsible for what Hansen did. But the oversight gap is yours to own, sir. He looked at her for a long time. Is there a version of this where my command survives? He said. Yes, she said. If you cooperate fully, and your statement reflects genuine engagement with the oversight failure. The committee's concern is the systemic problem, not the individual commander who got exploited by it. And if I don't cooperate fully, then the authentication findings speak for themselves, she said, and the committee draws its own conclusions about command awareness. He sat very straight in his chair. I'll give you the authorization, he said, and I'll write the statement. Thank you, sir. She was at the door when he said, Lieutenant. She stopped. The formation incident, he said. I've already submitted a formal correction to the administrative record. The badge removal, I've documented it as an error in command judgment. It'll be in my own file. She turned to look at him. I don't tell you that for absolution, he said. I tell you because it happened in front of 42 people, and those people deserve to know that their commanding officer understood it was wrong. She held his gaze for a moment. That matters, she said quietly. More than you know. She walked out. The authentication team arrived at 1410, not 1400, and the 10-minute delay was enough time for Crane's office to make one more attempt. The call came through the base communication system, a priority routing that was flagged to Voss's office, and simultaneously to the duty officer, requesting a formal delay in the authentication process pending resolution of the IG inquiry. The duty officer brought the flag to Maya. She read it. She handed it back. "Log it," she said, "and continue with the authentication." "Lieutenant, a priority routing from a flag officer's office." "I understand," she said. "Log the request with a timestamp and continue with the authentication." The review charter authorizes the authentication process independently of any IG inquiry that postdates the review initiation. If there's a question about that, the committee charter is in my documentation. The duty officer looked at her, then he logged it. The authentication team was 4 people, 2 technical analysts, a documentation specialist, and a senior officer named Colonel Walsh, whom Maya had worked with once before briefly, in a context that neither of them referenced now. Walsh was a compact woman in her late 40s, who moved through rooms the way experienced people move through rooms efficiently and without announcement, and who had the specific quality of presence that comes from having spent a long time being very good at something most people don't know exists. She looked at the documentation stack Maya had built. "This is thorough," she said. "It needs to be," Maya said. Walsh looked at the modification record. The 91 to 73. "Web," Maya confirmed. "There are 6 others, all documented with the same architecture." Walsh set the file down. "The regional command connection, how far does it go?" "Far enough," Maya said. "The documentation covers 4 years and 3 installations. The common thread is consistent." Walsh nodded. "We'll need 6 hours. "You have until 2000 before Crane's inquiry generates a procedural intervention," Maya said. "Then we'll need 5 hours," Walsh said. The authentication ran from 1500 to 2015. In those 5 hours and 15 minutes, the following things happened simultaneously. Hansen met with the base legal officer and declined to make a statement. The declination was logged. Voss wrote a 7-page formal statement describing the oversight gap in his subsystem review process, his observations of the Hansen scoring modification after Maya's flagging, and his assessment of the administrative conditions that had allowed the pattern to persist undetected. He signed it. He gave it to Walsh directly. Grange submitted his written observations, the ones he had already begun writing, as he told Maya he had, before she asked him to write them. They were 14 pages single-spaced, covering 3 cycles of specific candidate interactions, dated with military precision. Walsh read the first 3 pages and said quietly, "This man should have been an investigator." Kowalski, who knew none of what was happening in the administrative layer of the base, went to the equipment room at 1800 and performed his 6th consecutive dry-fire session with the corrected grip. He did it for 90 minutes. He didn't skip a single repetition. And across the base in the specific quiet way that institutions process seismic events that have not yet been officially announced, people felt something shifting. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in the way that air pressure changes before a storm, an atmospheric change that the body registers before the mind has language for it. Reyes said to Kowalski when he got back from the equipment room, "Something's happening." Kowalski toweled off his hands. "I know. The authentication team, those are federal-level credentials." "I know." Reyes lowered his voice. "Is it about what I think it's about?" Kowalski sat on his bunk. He thought about Grange's face during the range session. He thought about the correction note in his file. He thought about a woman standing in front of a commander who had just torn a badge off her uniform, holding out her hand, with the absolute stillness of someone who had decided a long time ago that the opinion of the person in front of her was not the measure of who she was. "Yeah," he said. "I think it is." At 2015, Walsh called Maya into the documentation room. She closed the door. She looked at Maya for a moment. "The findings are authenticated," she said. "The documentation is unimpeachable. The modification records the clustering pattern, the administrative discontinuation of the 2 prior reviews. It's all there, and it's all tied." "Good," Maya said. "The transmission is going to the committee tonight," Walsh said, "with my authentication signature attached." "Good," Maya said again. Walsh looked at her. "The regional command implication. Crane." "Yes." "The committee is going to have to involve the IG at a level above Crane's inquiry. That's going to take time." "I know," Maya said. Weeks, maybe months. That's all right, Maya said. The documentation doesn't expire, it just waits. Walsh picked up the authenticated package. She looked at the cover sheet, the review ID, the installation designation, the authorization chain. Maya's name in the lead reviewer field. 7 candidates, Walsh said. 7, Maya confirmed. Webb was the best of them. Maya thought about Grange's voice when he had said his name. The specific weight in those 2 syllables. From what I can see in the record, she said yes. Walsh looked at the package for another moment. How do you do this? Walsh said. Not the documentation. The coming into a place where nobody knows who you are, where they look at you and decide you're nothing. How do you do it without letting it in? Maya was quiet for a moment. She thought about the formation, about the badge being pulled from her chest, about 42 people watching and waiting for her to crack, and the specific internal state she had been in during those seconds, which was not defiance, and was not indifference, and was not the performance of strength. I know something they don't know yet, she said finally. That's enough. Walsh looked at her. What do you know? She said. That the ending is already written, Maya said. I've read the whole story. I just have to get to the last page. Walsh nodded slowly. Transmission goes out at 2100, she said. I'll be at the workstation, Maya said. She walked out of the documentation room and into the corridor, and the corridor was empty except for Carver, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his face doing the complicated thing it had been doing for 24 hours. When he saw her, he straightened. It's done, he said. Almost, she said. Almost. He exhaled. Almost is good. It is, she agreed. They stood there for a moment in the corridor. Then Carver said, I've been thinking about why I came to you last night, at 0200. Why then? Why, she said. Because I had just finished reading Grange's statement, he said. He showed it to me before he submitted it. 14 pages. And in the middle of it, he described a conversation he'd had with you about Webb, about all of them, and he wrote, Carver paused. He wrote that you told him the records would be corrected, that those 7 people would have their records corrected. Yes, Maya said. Can you actually guarantee that? He said. Or is that something you said to keep him moving? She looked at him directly. It's something I said because it's true, she said. The committee has the authority to mandate record correction as part of the remediation findings. It's not guaranteed by me. It's guaranteed by the documentation. If the findings hold, and they will hold, the command will be directed to conduct individual record reviews for every candidate who washed out of Hanson's section in the last 4 cycles. Webb, Carver said. Webb, she confirmed. He's been out for 11 months, Carver said. What does a record correction do for someone who's been out for 11 months? She held his gaze. It tells him the truth, she said, about why it happened. It gives him the documentation to request reinstatement review if he wants it. It gives him the ability to walk into any institution for the rest of his life and say, I didn't fail. I was failed. And here is the proof. Carver was quiet for a long time. That's not nothing, he said finally. No, Maya said. It's not nothing at all. She walked toward the workstation. At 2100, Walsh transmitted the authenticated findings package to the Joint Committee. At 2103, Maya's phone received a single encrypted message from Torres. It read, Package received. Authentication confirmed. Well done. She set the phone down. She was still sitting at the workstation when Voss walked in at 2130. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there looking at the empty workstation, the cleared files, the space that had been the center of 22 hours of work, and now looked exactly like what it had always been, a secondary operations desk with nothing remarkable about it. It's transmitted, he said, not a question. Yes, sir, she said. He nodded. What happens to my command, he said. That depends on the committee, she said. Your statement was thorough and honest. Your cooperation with the authentication was documented. Those factors carry weight. But you can't promise anything. No, sir, she said. I can't. He stood there for another moment. Then he said quietly, I've spent 22 years building something here. And some of it, a part of it, was being used for something I didn't know about. And I didn't know about it because I didn't look closely enough. Yes, sir, she said. I should have looked, he said. Yes, sir, she said again. You should have. He looked at her. It was a direct, undefended look, the look of a man who has decided that honesty at this point is the only useful currency left. You're very good at this, he said. Whatever this is. It's the job, sir, she said. Is it? He said. Because most people who do jobs don't look the way you looked in that formation. He stopped. When I made my error, she waited. You looked like someone who had already been through something harder than me, he said, and decided I wasn't worth the energy of responding to the way I expected you to. She said nothing. He nodded once, as though she had said something, as though her silence had confirmed whatever he was working out. Good night, Lieutenant, he said. Good night, sir, she said. He walked out. She sat alone at the workstation for a moment, in the very specific quiet of something finished, and she thought about 7 names, and she thought about the 7-page statement Voss had written, and she thought about Grange's 14 pages, and Carver's legal pad, and Kowalski doing 90 minutes of dry fire in an equipment room because someone told him the truth about what had been done to him, and he had decided that truth was worth acting on. She thought about the fact that she had come to this installation as a name on a temporary assignment roster, and she was leaving it with something she had built out of paper and observation, and the specific stubborn commitment to finding the exact shape of what had actually happened here. She thought about Walsh asking how she did it. And she thought about the answer she had given, which was true, but which was not the complete truth. The complete truth was simpler. She did it because someone had to, and she was the one who showed up. She slept for 4 hours. Not because 4 hours was enough, but because 4 hours was what the situation allowed, and she had learned a long time ago that the relationship between rest and readiness was not about ideal conditions. It was about taking what was available and using it completely. She was asleep within 3 minutes of lying down and awake again at 0500, with the specific alertness of someone whose nervous system had been trained to understand that the end of one phase of a problem was not the same as the end of the problem. The authenticated findings were transmitted. The committee had them. That part was done. What was not done was everything that happened next. She dressed in the dark, made a note in her observation log about the prior evening's timeline, and walked to the dining facility before most of the base was moving. She ate alone at the corner table, the same one she had chosen her first morning on the installation when she had been a name on a temporary roster, and nothing more. And she thought about the shape of the next 72 hours. The committee would review the authenticated package. That process typically took between 48 and 96 hours for a review of this scope. During that window, the findings existed in a kind of institutional suspension, real documented, authenticated, but not yet officially acted upon. In that suspension, the people named in the findings had time. Not enough time to undo what had been documented, but enough time to attempt to manage the narrative around it. Crane had already started. The message came to her phone at 0547, not from Torres this time, but from the originating command directly, which meant it was coming from someone senior to Torres, and was therefore something that required her direct attention rather than relay communication. It was brief. It said that Admiral Crane had filed a secondary IG complaint at 0300, not against the review methodology this time, but against Maya specifically. The complaint alleged that she had exceeded her review authority by making direct contact with training staff outside documented channels, by accessing personnel records beyond her authorized scope, and by conducting what the complaint characterized as an unauthorized covert investigation operating under the cover of a procedural review. She read it twice. Then she set her fork down and looked at the table for a moment. The complaint was not surprising. It was in fact almost exactly what she would have done in Crane's position, file a procedural challenge against the reviewer rather than the review create a personal liability question that could be used to cast doubt on the findings' integrity. Force the committee to evaluate whether the documentation had been obtained through methods that compromised its admissibility. It was a reasonable strategy. It was also going to fail because every contact she had made with training staff had been within the documented scope of the review charter, and every file she had accessed had been through channels authorized by VOS, a station commander's direct authorization that created an impeccable paper trail for exactly this kind of challenge. She knew this. Crane's legal team knew this too, which meant the complaint wasn't designed to win. It was designed to delay. To create enough procedural noise that the committee's review timeline extended past the point where the findings could generate immediate administrative action against the regional command. She picked up her fork and finished eating. Then she walked to the secure communications room and placed a call to the originating command. The voice that answered belonged to a two-star general named Harmon, whom she had briefed exactly once before, 14 months ago, in a context that, like most of the significant contexts in her professional life, didn't appear in any accessible file. Harmon was a woman who had spent 30 years being underestimated and had long since stopped finding it either surprising or interesting. She got to the point the way people get to the point when they have learned that preamble is a luxury. "Crane's complaint," Harmon said. "I saw it," Maya said. "Your charter authorization is clean." "I know. The committee's legal staff reviewed it this morning. They're treating the complaint as a delay tactic. It's not going to hold." "Good," Maya said. "However," Harmon said, and that word had weight. "Crane's office has also contacted 3 members of the committee directly, informally, expressing concerns about the review's scope and the reviewer's methods." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Which 3?" Harmon named them. Maya filed the names. 2 of them were people she knew by reputation. The third was someone she had expected might surface in this context. "The third one," she said. "Harmon, the third one, has a prior administrative relationship with the regional command structure." "I know," Harmon said. "We know. It's being looked at." "That's a committee integrity issue," Maya said. "Yes, it is," Harmon said. "Which is why I'm calling you at 0600 to tell you that the committee's review is being elevated. The findings aren't going to sit in a standard review process. They're going to a dedicated subcommittee with full IG backing." Maya sat very still. A dedicated subcommittee with full IG backing was not a standard outcome of a qualification review. It was not something that happened when the findings were limited to a single training officer's scoring misconduct. It happened when the findings connected upward into a regional command structure in a way that required a level of investigative authority above the standard review mandate. "How many installations?" she said. "We've identified preliminary indicators at 2 others," Harmon said. "Similar pattern, different personnel, but the administrative fingerprint is consistent with what you documented." "Crane," Maya said. "That's what the subcommittee is going to determine," Harmon said. "Not us, not you, them. Your job is done." "My job is done," Maya repeated. "The documentation is authenticated. The findings are in the record. Whatever happens next with Crane, with the regional command structure, with the 3 installations, that's above your pay grade and mine, and it's exactly where it needs to be." She was quiet for a moment. "Webb," she said. "The candidate record corrections are part of the remediation directive," Harmon said. "All 7. They'll be processed as part of the subcommittee mandate. Timeline: 30 days, maximum." Maya closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. "All right," she said. "How are you?" Harmon said. "I'm good. You've been on this one for 3 weeks." "It's fine," Maya said. "I'm fine." A pause. "They gave you a hard time." She thought about the formation, the badge, 42 people watching, the specific feeling of metal against her palm when she held out her hand and asked for government property back. "Standard," she said. Harmon made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Get some rest before the next one." "Yes, ma'am." The line closed. Maya sat in the secure room for another moment. Then she stood up and walked out into the morning, which was already building its heat from the ground up in the way. Desert mornings did, pressing warmth against the soles of her boots before the air had fully committed to the temperature it was going to become. She had 6 hours before her departure was scheduled. She used them. The first thing she did was find Grange. He was in the equipment room running an inventory check, the kind of methodical work that senior enlisted men do when they are giving their hands something to occupy while their minds work through larger problems. He looked up when she came in and read her face with the same precision he always applied to reading faces. "It transmitted," he said. "Last night," she confirmed. "The findings are authenticated and in the committee record." He nodded once. Set down his clipboard. "Webb," he said. "Record correction is part of the remediation directive," she said. 30 days. He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that she hadn't seen on him before. Something that was a long way from the careful, measured affect he kept in professional contexts. Something that was underneath everything he had built across 18 years of service. Simply a person who had watched a young man get destroyed by a system he trusted and had spent 3 years unable to do anything about it. "Thank you," he said. His voice was level, but barely. "You did the work," she said. 14 pages, dated observations. That's what made the clustering pattern unimpeachable. "You found the pattern," he said. "You named the people in it," she said. "That's different. That's harder." He looked at the equipment around them for a moment. The racks of gear, the maintained rifles in their brackets. All of it. The visible infrastructure of a program that was at its core, the real thing that Voss had built and that Hansen had used as cover for something else. "The program," Grange said. "Echo. What happens to it?" "It continues," she said. "The program isn't the problem. The program is genuinely rigorous, and the standards are legitimate. What happened here was a parasite, not the organism itself. When you remove the parasite, the organism continues. Under Voss. Under whoever the command decides," she said. "That's not my determination to make." Grange nodded slowly. Then he said, "You know what I've been thinking about since last night." "What?" "The first morning you were here," he said. "I watched you at that table in the dining facility, writing in that notebook, and I thought I had the same thought everyone had. Temporary. Paper. Not relevant." He paused. "And then I watched you for about 30 seconds, and something changed." "What changed?" she said. "The way you held the pen," he said. "Most people write. You were recording. There's a physical difference in how it looks. The angle, the pressure, the speed. You were building a document, not making notes." He looked at her. "I've only seen that quality of attention in people who have done things that required it to survive." She held his gaze. "What are you?" he said, not unkindly, with the genuine curiosity of a man who has earned the right to ask by being exactly what he said he was throughout. She thought about the question. About the 7 TDY designations. About the places she couldn't name, and the things she couldn't discuss, and the specific texture of living a professional life that existed mostly in the spaces between what was officially documented. "I'm a reviewer," she said. He almost smiled. "That's what you always say." "It's always true," she said. He picked up his clipboard, set it down again. "I'm going to finish this inventory," he said. "And then I'm going to do my job same as I've always done my job. And maybe it'll count for something now that the thing underneath it has been removed." "It always counted," she said. "Don't let the parasite take that from you." He looked at her. 18 years of doing it right," she said. "That's yours. Nothing that Hansen did changes what you built." I was quiet for a moment. "Go," he said, "before I say something embarrassing." She left. The second thing she did was find Kowalski. He was on the range floor for morning practice, which was a voluntary session. The formal assessment wasn't until the following day. She stood at the observation position and watched him for 10 minutes before he noticed her. When he did, he held his position for a moment, the rifle steady, and then he fired. Center. He fired again. Center again. She watched him work through 6 more rounds with the corrected grip, each one settling into a pattern that was visibly different from the work she had observed in his first week's cleaner. More committed, the muscle memory finally beginning to rewrite itself around the truth of the technique, rather than the error that had been built into its foundation. He came off the line when the session ended and walked toward her. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she confirmed. "I'm ready," he said. And then with the specific self-awareness of someone who has learned not to make promises about things they can't guarantee. I think I'm ready. You are, she said. He looked at her. You're leaving. Yes. Today. This afternoon. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the range, then back at her. Will I know, he said. Will I know if what you did, the review, all of it, will I know if it changed anything for the people who already washed out? You'll know in 30 days, she said. Check Webb's record. If you know how to reach him, tell him to check his record. Kowalski's jaw tightened. I know how to reach him, he said. We went through phase 1 together. Tell him, she said. Tell him to check it. He nodded. Then he extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm, the corrected position already becoming the natural one, the body already beginning to forget what it had been taught to do wrong. I don't know who you are, he said. I mean that literally. I don't know your actual history or what you actually do or any of it. I know, she said. But I know that you looked at something nobody else looked at, he said. And you told me the truth about what was wrong. And the truth was the only thing that could fix it. He paused. I don't know what that is exactly. But it's not nothing. No, she said. It's not nothing at all. She walked off the range floor. The third thing she did was the hardest. She went to Voss's office. He was there, which she had expected, at his desk, which she had expected, but the quality of his presence in the room was different from every previous time she had been in it. He looked like a man who had slept badly and made peace with that. Who had arrived at a place that was uncomfortable and decided that discomfort in this case was the appropriate condition. He looked up when she came in. I'm leaving at 1300, she said. He nodded. She sat down across from him without being invited, which was a first. He didn't react to it. The subcommittee, she said. Someone from the committee's legal staff will contact you within 48 hours. They'll need to schedule a formal interview regarding your statement and the oversight gap. I understand, he said. The interview is not adversarial, she said. Your cooperation is documented. Your statement was thorough. Walk in and tell the truth the same way you told it to me. I know how to tell the truth, Lieutenant, he said. Not defensively, just factually. I know you do, sir, she said. I'm saying it because some people, when they're in a formal IG context, tell a slightly curated version of the truth. Not because they're dishonest. Because the formal setting creates pressure toward self-protection. Don't do that. He looked at her. The curated version would be worse for me. The curated version would be unnecessary for you, she said. Your position is defensible as it stands. The oversight gap was real, but it wasn't willful neglect. The documentation supports that. Don't complicate it by trying to improve on it. He nodded. They sat for a moment in the specific quiet of two people who have been through something together that neither of them could fully describe to anyone outside the room. The badge, he said. Sir, I need to say it, he said. Not for you, for me. He looked at his desk. In 22 years, I have never put my hands on a subordinate's uniform in a disciplinary context outside proper procedure. I believed in procedure. I believed in the line between authority and conduct, and in one moment in front of 42 people I crossed it, because I was threatened by something I didn't understand, and I chose to respond to that threat the wrong way. She said nothing. You handled it the right way, he said. You handled it better than I deserved. I handled it the way the situation required, she said. That's generous. It's accurate, she said. I needed the 42 witnesses. I needed the documented record of the interaction. If you had been cordial and professional, I would have had a harder time building what I needed to build. She paused. Your error was also in a way useful to the process. He stared at her. Then he said very quietly, I don't know whether to be relieved or appalled by that. You can be both, she said. They're not mutually exclusive. Something in his face shifted. Not a smile exactly. But the place a smile comes from after everything that had preceded it had cleared enough space. Are you always this? He started. Yes, she said. He exhaled. God. It's the job, sir. He looked at her for a long moment. What does your record actually say, the real one? The one behind the 7 TDY designations. She met his gaze. It says I did my job, she said. That's all? That's everything, she said. He nodded slowly. She stood. He stood. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and direct, the grip of a man who had made the full transition from the commander who had pulled the badge off her chest to the commander who was standing in the wreckage of his own error and deciding what to build next. Good luck with the subcommittee, sir, she said. Good luck with whatever comes next for you, Lieutenant, he said. She walked to the door, stopped. Commander, she said without turning. Yes, the program is worth saving, she said. What you built here, the real standard, the legitimate rigor, it's worth what it costs to remove what was feeding off it. Don't lose sight of that. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I won't. She walked out. At 12:45, she stood in the overflow barracks and looked at the bunk that had been hers for 3 weeks. She had already packed. Everything she had brought fit into a single bag, which was always the case. She had learned early in her career that the relationship between what you carried and your ability to move freely was one of the more reliable truths the work had taught her. Specialist Lim was sitting on her own bunk across the room, pretending to read something on her phone. Maya picked up her bag. You're leaving, Lim said, still looking at her phone. Yes. Was it the second one? Lim said. What I said, that night. Was I right? Maya looked at her. Lim was 23 years old and had the specific quality of quiet perception that most people that age hadn't developed yet. The kind of perception that came from watching more than talking and believing that what you observed was worth something. Yes, Maya said. You were right. Lim nodded. She set her phone down. She looked at Maya directly. Are you going to be okay after this? Whatever this was? Maya considered the question with the same seriousness she brought to all genuine questions. Yes, she said. I'm going to be fine. Good, Lim said. Because this place felt off when you got here, and I didn't know what it was, and now it doesn't feel off anymore. She paused. I don't know what you did, but I know that whatever it was the right thing. Maya looked at her for a moment. Do good work here, she said. Whatever they assign you, do it like it matters. Does it matter? Everything you do here goes into someone's record, Maya said. And records are either true or they're not. Make yours true. Lim nodded. Maya walked out. The vehicle that would take her to the airfield was waiting at 1300 exactly. Carver was standing beside it. Not as a formal send-off, not in any official capacity, just there. The way people are there when they have decided that being there is the correct thing, and haven't found a more formal reason to justify it. He looked at her bag. That's everything. That's everything, she said. He nodded. He looked at the vehicle, then at her. You know, when you first walked into the operations building, I thought. I know what you thought, she said. Yeah. He paused. I was wrong. Most people were, she said. That's not a criticism. It's a design feature. He looked at her. Of you. Of the work, she said. If people knew what they were looking at when I walked in, the work wouldn't function. He thought about that. That seems like a lonely way to do a job, he said. She put her bag in this vehicle. It's a precise way, she said. There's a difference. She got in. He stood at the vehicle door for a moment. Reeves, he said. She looked at him. I'm going to write a statement, he said. For the subcommittee. Beyond what I already gave you. A full account. Everything I observed over 3 years that I filed under the wrong category. She held his gaze. Do that, she said. Be specific, be dated, be honest about the moments you chose not to look more closely, and be honest about why. That's going to reflect badly on me, he said. It's going to reflect honestly on you, she said. Which is different. He nodded. Those are different things, aren't they? He said. With you, always different things. The vehicle pulled away. She watched the installation recede through the back window for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned forward and looked at the road ahead, and she thought about the shape of what she was leaving behind and the shape of what was going to come next. And she held both of those shapes in her mind with the same precise, unhurried attention she brought to everything. 6 weeks later, Marcus Webb received an official communication from the Joint Committee's Administrative Remediation Office. It informed him that his Phase 3 assessment record had been reviewed and that a systematic error in the assessment process had been identified and documented, and that his recorded assessment outcome had been officially corrected in the permanent military record. It told him that his failure was not his failure. He read it twice at his kitchen table. Then he set it down. Then he picked it up and read it a third time, the way people read things when the words are simultaneously exactly what they needed to read, and more than they had allowed themselves to hope for. He called Kowalski that evening. Kowalski, who had passed his qualification assessment 8 days after Maya's departure center, massed 3 consecutive rounds. Corrected grip muscle memory, finally aligned with the truth picked up on the second ring. "I got it," Webb said. "I know," Kowalski said. "I've been waiting. 37 days. I know." A silence. "Who was she?" Webb said. "The reviewer. Who was she really?" Kowalski thought about the observation deck, about the scope she carried that wasn't issued, about the formation and the badge and the specific quality of stillness in someone who already knows the ending of the story they're standing inside, about what Grange had said that evening on the track. "God, you're good at this." "I don't know," he said. "Not exactly." But she was exactly who she needed to be," Kowalski said, "to do what needed doing." Webb was quiet for a long moment. "That's enough," he said finally. "That's more than enough." And it was. It was exactly enough, because the woman who had walked into that installation with a temporary assignment code and a soft access badge and nothing visible to recommend her had known from the first morning what most people never learn, that the measure of a person is not what others see when they look at you, but what you